Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP. This is where you go for all the things that aren't the show being Planet America, which is on Friday nights on, well, iView, I guess, and Facebook, YouTube, all over the place, all the places you're not currently watching. And this is Pepisode 88, a very fortunate podcast in China, and we are very fortunate every week to be joined by Dr. David Smith. Hello, Dr. Dave.
Hi, Chaz. How's it going?
Not too bad, but it's not Thanksgiving like I thought it was last week. So I'm putting the woke stuff off next week. Man, I'm really teasing this. It better be good.
Wokesgiving.
That's right.
Yeah, can't wait for Wokesgiving.
Oh, it's going to be awesome.
Because you literally can't hear people complaining about wokeism anywhere else on the internet.
Well,
you can't.
This is the thing. You know well, Dr. Dave, that I've stayed away from that topic as much as I could over the last 2 years.
Yes.
But we opened the door on Planet America 2 weeks ago. When you open the door, it's very hard to close it. You got to...
Well, I don't think that this podcast should have to take responsibility for the TV show's editorial mistakes, frankly.
Unfortunately, the rules of wokeism are that you pay for it in every media that you respond in for the rest of your life, and I am finding that right now. But anyway, let's forget that. That's next week. That's Wokesgiving.
Yeah, before we go on, I'd like to thank Weensy and the Kegster for having me on the new Blurt.
Yes. Yes, was it good?
Yes.
Did you disgrace the podcast?
I don't think I disgraced the podcast. I'd have to say it was a little bit more structured than our podcast is usually. That's not a criticism of either us or of Weensy and the Kegster, but you might experience a more coherent performance from me than you usually get on PEP.
I'm a little surprised that the Kegster is known for his structure and coherence. But,
I don't know if that's what he's known for, but
sure.
Anyway.
That's okay. Let's get on with our podcast. I am going to be listening to that. Thank you for reminding me. Tell me to put a link. I'll put a link in the homework. Remind me after the podcast, Dave.
All right.
Okay. First of all, the stuff I'm not going to be talking about during this podcast, because I spoke at length on Planet America, was the Rittenhouse trial. If you have anything to say about Dave, now's the time.
The jury still hasn't reached a verdict yet.
They haven't. That is true.
Does that surprise you that they're still, or is this because there are a lot of different charges? Because the way that you were talking about it last week, you would have expected them to come back in 20 minutes.
I think the major charges, I just think there's just very, very little chance that Rittenhouse will be found guilty on the major charges, but there are a number of minor charges. In particular, at the very end, the judge allowed the prosecution to saddle on a bunch of quite minor charges, which maybe he might go for. So they might be discussing them, potentially. Okay. I will say this, that after, there was an interesting little rider. I did talk about this on the show, but just for those who don't watch it, there was an interesting little rider to what we talked about last week. I played that clip, remember, where Grosskreutz essentially said he was pointing the gun at... he only shot me after I pointed the gun at him. The next day after our podcast, he went on, or 2 days after, he went on Good Morning America and took that back.
Wow.
And said, no, he wasn't pointing the gun.
Where does the law stand on retracting evidence on Good Morning America?
I think it's not admissible, Dr. Dave, and so I don't think it's going to help.
Isn't the jury also not sequestered either? They've just been told not to talk to anyone about it?
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they're not watching Good Morning America because they're human beings. But having said that...
There's so many more people watch Good Morning America than listen to our podcast.
I don't believe you, Dr. Dave. Show me the evidence next week. But yeah, he retracted it. And then a photo came out from a different angle, which was much sharper than the photo they were showing him in court when they asked him about this. And it looked like he wasn't pointing the gun at Rittenhouse.
Okay, so have we all learned the lesson of let's just not speculate on the outcomes of trials
but Dr. Dave, this stuff wasn't in the trial.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is that Rittenhouse might get away with one here. That this guy got confused on the stand.
Yeah.
He said the perfect thing for Rittenhouse.
Mm.
The prosecution is incompetent.
Yeah.
And for all kinds of reasons. And they proved that again during this week. And as a result of that, the self-defense claim that Rittenhouse is running with, at least in Grosskreuz's instance, it might have been a real close one. But I don't think it is going to be a real close one because of the way the trial went.
What a shocker that a right-wing vigilante would get away with a murder in a courthouse where the judge's phone plays one of Trump's theme songs.
I'm not blaming the judge on this one, though. I'm blaming the prosecution.
What an absolute shocker. Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, I have nothing else to say. Let's see what happens with the verdict. Let's do a couple of quick follow-ups before we get on to this week's material. Afghanistan, we haven't talked about that for a while. You might recall I was a bit obsessed a few months back with the number of people who were remaining in Afghanistan, the count of American citizens, in particular, the count of legal permanent residents that we never heard.
Yes.
They never had a number for that. 2 weeks ago, the State Department informed congressional staff that it's in touch with 363 American citizens in Afghanistan now. 176 of them want to leave, which is more than the 100 who are left in Afghanistan that they told us about in September and October. All of a sudden, they multiplied. I don't know how that happened. They also said, during that period when 100 wanted to leave, they apparently helped evacuate 218 American citizens and 131 legal permanent residents, even though it kept on being 100 wanting to leave and now there's 176. So I think those numbers were brought to us from the people who come up with Russia's COVID numbers. It's something a bit suspicious about these numbers. But the interesting things about me, for me, which I just brushed past, was the bit where they said they evacuated 131 legal permanent residents. Because until now, they've been trying very hard to not put numbers on the legal permanent residents.
Yeah.
They say they're not tracking those numbers. I find that odd. But this week we found out why they're trying to keep a lid on those numbers. The State Department told Capitol Hill aides in private, apparently, that there are as many as 14,000 legal permanent residents still in Afghanistan. The number who want to leave, we don't know, but 14,000 is quite a lot of people.
Yeah.
They brought that up in a hearing when some of the congressional reps brought up in a hearing, and they asked, "It's 14,000, isn't it?" And they wouldn't say it in public. The State Department aide said that the agency doesn't track the figure officially, so they didn't want to comment. Now the question for me is, if that's true, which I don't believe it is, but if that's true, why aren't they tracking the legal permanent residents? Why don't they count? I find that very, very strange. But yeah, regardless, 14,000 is a lot of people. And we'll see if we hear about them again. But and of course, that doesn't even mention the Afghan allies who have just been completely forgotten. The numbers of them, we got no idea. At one point in time, we were kicking around 20,000 potentially. We got no idea. So they're just waiting there, snug as a bug in a rug, in a country where I think 14 of the 33 Taliban government ministers are designated terrorists, according to the UN Secretary Council, including the Prime Minister, his two top deputies, the Defence Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Deputy Foreign Minister, and let's not forget the Interior Minister, that's like their police minister, who's on the FBI's most wanted list. So, yeah, they're having a good time over there.
Despite that, there will be people who don't want to leave.
Look, we know that there are people who don't want to leave because they have family members there and they know they can't bring their family members out of Afghanistan.
Some people will want to stay anyway.
Yeah, sure. I was going to say, I'm not ruling out.
El Hadi told me the story of, or alerted me to the story of Zablon Simonov, who was the very famous last Jewish resident of Kabul during the first version of the Taliban, who were like more violent and more brutal than this version, and pretty anti-Semitic. There are actually two Jewish residents, and they hated each other. They just didn't get along with each other. They were constantly actually calling the Taliban on each other because they hated each other so much. And I think the Taliban just got so sick of them that they put them both in jail once, but then got so annoyed with their bickering that they threw them out of jail. He survived that. So there are people who stay around for, whatever reason of their own.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I believe it's 14,000 of them, but yes, I take your point. There would be some. Just before I leave Afghanistan, there was a poll this week, which is sort of relevant to all this, from a military group. They're called More in Common. And their poll was 73%. It's a poll of Afghan veterans.
Yes.
73% of Afghanistan veterans feel betrayed. 67% feel humiliated. 7 in 10 believe that America did not leave Afghanistan with honour. And 78% believe an energetic effort to rescue our Afghan allies from the clutches of the Taliban would improve their mental health being and sense of well-being. For what it's worth, just throwing that out there. We're going to get to talk about Biden's impeachment a little bit later on. when we talk about Paul Gosar, it's so clear the way these cards are stacking for after the midterms. I don't know if it's going to be Afghanistan as a topic. I suspect it's going to be too old by then. They'll probably have moved on to a different topic. But we'll see. Just flagging that. This might be the topic. We'll see. Dave, follow up on Anti-Woke University.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It turns out that, remember I mentioned last week that there were a lot of intellectual dark web figures associated with AUTW, I think that's what it's calling, it's Austin, TEDx University. Apparently they're not actually going to this university. And so there were some very interesting clarifying comments. So one of the biggest names that they had attached to this was Steven Pinker, who's very, very famous in
Linguist.
the whole field of the brain. They said that he was on board, but he clarified, "Oh no, this is the kind of university I want my children to go to, not the kind of university that I want to go to."
I see.
Numerous people. Larry Summers, among others, have sort of quietly taken their names off it. Some of them were not happy about the fact that the incoming president of this university was claiming that free intellectual inquiry doesn't happen in universities, because most of these characters not only are they tenured figures at universities, they're very highly paid tenured figures. And in fact, they're basically celebrity public intellectuals. These are actually not people who've been run out of academia on a rail. These are people who have done enormously well out of academia and have done particularly well given their controversial status. Sorry, I just realised I've made a mistake. It wasn't Steven Pinker, it was Jonathan Haidt was the one who's at NYU.
Whose children are going to go to the University of Austin.
Yeah, no, they're not really going to go to the university, which probably actually won't exist still by the time that his children grow up. By the way, Haidt's book, I think it's called The Moral Sense, is very good. I'll add that one to the
book list.
reading list.
Okay.
I think it's called The Moral Sense,
right.
Why Good People Are Divided by Religion and Politics. It's a very good introduction, actually, to a lot of these kinds of issues. Sorry, not The Moral Sense, The Righteous Mind.
Gotcha.
The Righteous Mind is Jonathan Haidt's book. So, just a quick little update there. Just a reminder that they haven't actually launched a university. As one writer from The Guardian very trenchantly put it, they've launched a website.
Well, to be fair, you can do a lot of good things with a website. They could start a multi-level marketing scheme. That'd be nice. Yeah, okay. All right, well, that's a nice update there. I've got a follow-up as well on inflation. We talked a bit about that last week, and there's been so much written about inflation. It's only the flavour of the month. So just a few interesting things that I came across I thought I should add into the mix. First of all, a bit of an error on my behalf, really, because this is something I was going on about a few months ago and I kind of forgot, which was we spoke about the CPI inflating 6.2% in the last year, right?
Yeah.
But I did forget one key point, which is a year ago, the CPI was in the doldrums. Because it was in the middle of the pandemic, which means the starting point of that growth was lower than it really should be. So 6.2% is a bigger number than it should be. It's a misleadingly big number because it's still starting from the pit. So in actual fact, if the CPI had not been slumming it through 2020, if they'd been at the Federal Reserve's target figure, then the annual inflation rate over the last year would have been 5.1%, not 6.2%, which is still high, but let's just be as accurate with a number as we possibly can be.
Right, yes.
So there is that. The second thing is I mentioned last week about higher interest rates being associated with inflation, and that could be an issue with the debt. You made the point America is not about to go bankrupt from the debt anytime soon, and I agree with that. But I said the issue might be a budgetary issue on interest rate repayments. Well, just so happened that someone wrote an article about this. So I've got the numbers to actually put to this, which is the CBO estimates that the interest payments on the debt are $413 billion this year. For 2026, the interest rate on the 10-year Treasury projects 2.6% interest rate instead of the current 1.5%. So projecting forward, then the interest payments on the debt would be about $524 billion in 2026. And projecting forward, this is CBO's projections here, to a 2.8% interest rate in 2030, there'll be $829 billion a year interest rate repayments in the budget, which is much more than they're paying for defence right now, for instance. So that's a lot of money. Now, their projections 9 years ahead, who knows what's going to happen, but that is an issue when you're talking about rising interest rates and large debts, that it does consume a larger and larger portion of the budget every year.
And I mean that relates to something that I was saying last week, which is it's the rising interest rates that really fuck you with inflation. Absolutely. If you're in debt.
I also mentioned that real wages last week were starting to shrink with all this inflation, and I just want to be clear about something. I just responding to one of the comments from our beloved commenters. They really are a good bunch. I understand that real wages are by definition discounted by inflation. That's what real wages means. But the hope is usually after you've done the discounting, they don't have negative growth. You want them to have positive growth after that discounting. Unfortunately, that's what we have. And I've got numbers this time. Last time I didn't have numbers. Jason Furman's estimated the total compensation for workers is 0.6% below what they were in December 2019.
Wow.
After adjusting for inflation. That's not great. So anyway, so just flag that. A couple other things. I want to read you a couple of quotes. First, I want to read you a quote from an American Enterprise Institute economist, James Pethokoukis, who's conservative.
Okay.
Yeah,
you know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. He's conservative, but if you know the guy, he's conservative, but he's not an ideologue. He's not like a nutter. But anyway, this is...
Except when it comes to any economic issue. But anyway, go on.
An economist. Except when he talks about economic issues, he's an economist. His economic analysis is great. Look, I just want to read you this because I don't think you're going to disagree with this. It's actually responding to those who take one aspect of inflation, like, say, the high price of silicon chips, and then they explain that away as a one-off, right? This is what he says. Any period of sustained inflation is likely to begin with aberrant economic phenomena. The pattern takes months to emerge. In April, a fluke in the semiconductor supply chain sent the price of used cars soaring. Maybe this will return to normal in May. But then a transportation problem could suddenly push up the prices of meat and eggs. Imagine that June brings them back to earth, only to see the cost of children's clothes going through the roof. July and August each have rapid price growth as well for their own quirky reasons. Inflation skeptics seem to think that explaining the quirks dismisses the problem. It doesn't. The relevant issue isn't whether one-off factors explain any 1 month data. Instead, the question is whether the accumulated effect of several months of price spikes, each driven by unique factors, leads consumers, workers and businesses to change their expectations about the pace of future price increases. And I think that's a very sensible point to make, that inflation is about expectations.
Yes.
It's about behaviour. It's not about the price. The price of meat doesn't particularly matter for people who aren't buying meat, but if you create an expectation amongst people that prices are going to continue to rise, they change their economic behaviour, and that can be harmful.
Okay, look, I'm loath to say that he is actually correct about this. And you know what? I'm even going to extend his logic one step further to the claim which I've heard, which also there is a bit of truth to it, which is it can actually end up hurting the poor the most because the rich have ways of hedging against inflation. They actually have ways of dealing with those shifting expectations, whereas poorer people don't. So there you go. I'm making a right-wing argument for you.
James Pethokoukis is very pleased, and so am I. We're both beaming. But I mean, you are. That is true. That obviously, in this period of inflation, certain assets are going to be inflating as well, and the rich people can stock up on those particular assets, whatever they may be. But having said that, I wasn't driving for that, but thank you anyway. But what I do want to say, though, is given what I just said, it means that the media's obsession, and Dave might say my obsession, with inflation is particularly corrosive because that is what creates a lot of expectations.
It absolutely is what creates a lot of expectations.
Yeah, so the fact that for the last probably month, the media has been obsessed with inflation incessantly.
Yeah. My favourite genre of story from the media is, well, there's actually a lot of other stuff happening with the economy, some of it quite good. Why are people so focused on inflation? This is the 64th in our 126-part series on inflation.
Yeah, yes, no, it is true.
Yeah.
The other quote I wanted to read, and this is coming from this is actually a genuine question. I have a genuine question. I'm interested in your take on this, Dave. I'm interested in the take on some of our economist commenters, and we do have some economist commenters. Okay. You know who you are. I'm genuinely interested in their response to this argument from another conservative, Ramesh Ponnuru.
Yes.
He's been making this point quite frequently, and I don't know if it's true or not. So I'm going to just read out the quote and see what people think. Mm-hmm. It refers to the point you made last week, Dave, about how inflation helps borrowers. Okay?
Yes.
This is his quote. It's true that inflation can sometimes have the effect of transferring wealth from creditors to debtors, but that effect only happens to the extent that the inflation is caused by demand rather than by supply. Imagine an inflation caused by an unexpected doubling of the amount of currency in circulation. In the best case scenario, your take-home pay doubles. The price of milk doubles, airfares double, etc. The outstanding balance of your mortgage, though, stays the same. It's fixed in nominal terms. You repay it in dollars worth half as much as they used to be. That's a gain to you and a loss to the bank. Then imagine an inflation caused by a natural disaster that makes all goods and services twice as difficult to produce. Airfares double, the price of milk doubles, but there's no reason your take-home pay should double. Your mortgage payments are worth half as much as they used to be worth, so the bank still loses, but the money isn't twice as easy to make as in the previous scenario, so you, as the borrower, aren't coming out ahead. Now, what he described there was obviously a little simplistic. It was to make a broader point that supply-driven inflation is more of a concern than demand-driven inflation, and he postulates that right now, inflation is at least partly supply-driven. So therefore, it's probably not helping the borrowers as much as it could in other circumstances. What are your thoughts about that?
I still think the demand component is more important at the moment.
Yeah.
I think it is due, it's well documented how much more money is currently in people's pockets than there was. I would say, yes, obviously there are supply problems as well with things like supply chains. I don't see that being as much of a cause of inflation as the actual demand is.
What I would probably say, I think that's true. I think that's true. And what I would say is it's interesting to compare America's inflation rate to the rest of the world's inflation rate. Right. Because everyone did some kind of stimulus, but America did more, generally speaking, than the rest of the world. Yeah. And the rest of the world is having the same supply problems that America's having. So I think when you compare their inflation rates, and I have the numbers in front of me, you can see that I think that's evidence of the difference of the demand component in America to the other countries. Let me read you the numbers. Let's take America at 6.2%, even though it probably should be 5.1%, but using the official numbers. America's 6.2% inflation. At the same time, UK's 2.9%, Sweden's 2.8%, Spain's 5.3%, Norway 3.5%, Canada 4.6%, Netherlands 3.4%, Korea 3.1%, Italy 3.2%, Israel 2.2%, India 4.4%, Greece 3.4%. America's beating Greece twice it. Germany 4.5%, France 2.6%, Denmark 2.9%. Just to give you a snapshot there. The only worst countries I saw that were in any way comparable to America were Mexico, 6.2%, same as America. Russia, 7.4%. Brazil, 10.6%. So that's really esteemed company they've got right there. But I think that demonstrates what you just said. That at worst, it's 50-50 demand-supply and possibly more demand. So anyway.
I'd say there's more demand, but I'm happy to be challenged on that.
If anyone else wants to add anything in the comments, I am interested. I genuinely, when I saw that, I thought, oh, that's interesting from Ramesh, but I'm not qualified to call them out one way or another. Final note about inflation before we move on. The pessimism about the economy, you mentioned this before, that there are lots of good things in the economy at the moment. It's kind of stupid right now how much pessimism there is in the economy. Yes, there is inflation. It's not great. But let me tell you how stupid it is. Okay, first of all, let's just reiterate. 531,000 jobs last month. Plus, by the way, the previous 4 months, they've revised up 626,000 extra jobs on top of the jobs that were already there. So there's been heaps of revision going on, unsurprisingly, while things are so volatile post-COVID. Retail went up 1.7% just in the last month. Yeah. Like, that's huge. And even if you take away inflation, like, let's take all 0.9% of inflation away, that's still 0.8%. That's a lot. The median checking account, like we said, 50% larger than it was in 2019. The stock market is going off. Things are not that bad. Yet, if you look at the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index, it just fell to 66.8 in its November reading, from 71.7 in October. You might go, well, what does that mean? Let me tell you what that means. That's the lowest level since November 2011. Yes. Right? And it gets dumber. Oh, actually, before I say anything more, we should do this. It's the Michigan Corner. Well, the University of Michigan Corner, at the very least. Okay, all right, now we've sung that. Let's break the University of Michigan consumer sentiment down to parties. Independents have a consumer sentiment of 71.7 at the moment. Remember, the overall it was 66.8. Yeah. They have a consumer sentiment of 71.7, which is what it was in 2012. That's what they had in 2012. Yeah. That, to me, even that's lowballing it in my view, but 2012 isn't ridiculous. Like, you know, the economy was coming back at that point in time, so... Yeah, sort of. Yeah, kind of.
Unemployment was still 8%, I think, for most of the year in 2012.
Well, like I said, I still think they're lowballing it, but I think that's insane. But what I'm about to say is insane. The Republicans, their consumer sentiment is 37.2, which is the lowest in history. At the depths of the GFC, the very worst month of the GFC, which I think was March 2009 from memory, their rating was 48.3, almost 10 points higher than it is now. At the depths of the Jimmy Carter recession in 1980, their rating was 55.1. Right? That is insane and stupid. There is no way that the economy is that bad right now that it's sizably worse than the depths of the GFC.
Yeah, and look, okay, we have to remember something which I have said again and again about survey research. Okay, so this is a survey. It's an extremely good survey. This is a gold standard survey. There's a reason why it gets used and cited so much. It's because it is so well conducted and it's been so well conducted for so long. But something that is very, very difficult to get around in a survey is that answering survey questions, that is an act of political expression. Yes. And people who answer survey, people who do agree to answer survey questions are likely to be a bit more politically expressive than your average person. And it's just become the case. I mean, it always was the case that people's feelings about the economy, their beliefs about the economy were linked to partisanship. That's always been the case, but it's just got more so now. And so what people are actually talking about is how they feel about the Biden administration.
Yeah.
At least on the Republican side of the equation.
I think that's absolutely true. I also think that conservatives are being whipped up by conservative media more than they might have in the past.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, as I say, I think this is an accelerating trend. And also those claims, that's not reflected in economic behaviour, right? It's not like Republicans are going out and spending less at the moment.
Well, that was my question.
Yeah.
Given what we were just talking before about inflation, the problem is expectations. Like, at what point do these expectations affect economic behaviour to the point they actually affect the economy? You're saying you don't think they do affect behaviour?
Not judging by what else is happening in the economy at the moment. Maybe they could. Maybe these are affecting inflation. I don't know, but I don't think they would. We'll see.
It'll be interesting to see if we get to a point in coming years where there is a crossover to actually having real economic impact, because at that point in time, you've got a pretty screwed up country.
Well, Taz, given that we're currently at the point where people's partisan feelings are the major predictor of whether they're vaccinated or not and are going to die of COVID, I think we're actually well beyond that point.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
While you're running hot there, Dr. Dave, you wanted to talk about the Biden-Z meeting? Let's go for it.
Yeah, so this was this meeting that, it was a teleconference or Zoom conference that happened on Tuesday. And it began with this ostentatious display of politeness, with leaders referring to each other as old friends, etc. Now, I think it's worth emphasising the fact that this ostentatious display of politeness took place is in itself pretty significant, because the way that both sides had conducted themselves for most of the year had been more like open hostility, right? So you consider the last time that they were actually there in front of cameras, indeed that they invited the media in, was that summit in February, where they were basically trading barbs with each other about whose society is more fucked up. Okay, so this is very different. Now, ostentatious displays of politeness and friendliness, that's just normal in diplomacy. You know, we all know that that doesn't necessarily reflect how these people personally feel about each other. It's that observation of protocol is a way of trying to signal things are normal between us at the moment. And so the fact that the meeting took place within these normal sort of formalities, I believe was both sides trying to signal we are not letting things get out of control. Okay, I think there's an implicit acknowledgement here that hostilities had gone too far for all the kinds of reasons that we've talked about, that there was a real danger that both sides were creating expectations in their own populations that would impose increasing political costs on these leaders if they were seen to back down at all. And so they had to have something like this to turn the temperature down a bit, even though the issues that they were talking about were very intractable. And from what we've seen from what actually took place in this meeting, it was just a reminder of the intractability of these issues around Taiwan, around human rights, around really long-standing US objections to China subsidising its industries, all kinds of things. So those issues aren't going to go away. But this summit seemed to be a signal to say, we are not going to let these accidentally drift into war.
So you reckon even though there didn't appear to be any real progress in actual decision-making occurring during this meeting, at least that we know of, just the existence of the meeting, the opening of communication channels in itself is an achievement.
Yes, that was the important thing, right? Gotcha. That was the important signal on both sides. Now, both sides are in this position where they cannot be seen to back down, but yet they somehow have to manage to give the other side enough room so that to not force them to appear to be backing down either, so that both sides can go back to their own countries and say, we haven't backed down. So that's a very tricky thing to do, and it will mean that these tough issues they continue to get emphasised. But it does just seem that enough people have realised that the way that this was looking was that this could accidentally spill over into conflict. If there was some unforeseen incident, or if there was some reaction that caused another reaction that they then couldn't back down from. The whole idea was that this is designed to turn the temperature down. Now, as I say, these issues haven't gone away. Just today, Biden was actually talking about the possibility of a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics. What that means is not that US athletes would still go. I think after the last US experience of boycotting the Olympic Games in Moscow, where the main effect of it was just that the US got no medals, I don't think we're going to see athletic boycotts of any Olympics anytime in the future.
And importantly, Russia got a lot of medals. It was a great opportunity to allow Russia to boast about how good their athletes were.
Yes. But diplomatic boycott just means that, US government personnel don't go, which in the scheme of things isn't a very big deal. Given, Xi hasn't left China in the last 2 years. Physical presence is not as important and symbolic as it used to be. But I think that this meeting, though, was very symbolically important, basically as a way of letting each other know and letting the world know we've got a really big shared interest in not ending up in a war.
Yeah. I think maybe we might be rejoining, potentially, the parallel universe that we departed from about 5 years ago. In that, if Trump never existed and Biden became president, which he wouldn't have if Trump never existed. But anyway, if Biden had become president without Trump, I get the feeling that he would have been very chummy with China, because him and Xi had a pre-existing relationship from when Biden was vice president, where they were actually quite close. They actually had hundreds of hours of conversations. Xi was his point man. So they actually had a real relationship, and potentially it would have been like Biden likes personal relationships, and he had one with Xi. But when Trump got in, Trump made his thing to a competition with China,
I would say, he made it confrontation with China.
Yes.
Biden is the one who's talking up competition, even though Biden himself has been pretty confrontational. But you're right. Trump was confrontation.
You're right. I was looking for the right word. The brinksmanship. He built up the brinksmanship with China.
Yes.
And then Joe Biden had no choice but to reflect that. Otherwise, he would have looked bad because it was
in the end, that was probably the most popular thing that Trump did as president, rightly or wrongly. I think wrongly, but there's no denying that this was one of the few things he did that actually got bipartisan support.
Yeah, it cut through, exactly. But and when Biden became president, for the first year, he hasn't been exactly like Trump, but he has been following through, at least rhetorically, with a bit of that brinksmanship. Not as much as Trump, but I think more than Biden would have naturally been comfortable with. And
I'm just imagining my way through this scenario. So Hillary Clinton doesn't run for some reason. Obama convinces Biden to run. Biden beats Rubio in the election.
I don't think you're thinking this through, Dave. There's an obvious result, which is Biden. There's an obvious way through. And that is Biden becomes president when he's 83 after Hillary Clinton. That's not too old for Biden.
Fifth Democratic term in a row.
Yes. That was always going to happen. Yes. By the way, I shouldn't dwell on my terrible predictions, but way back when, my prediction was that Rubio was going to be the president after Obama, beating Hillary Clinton in that election, and I was very wrong. Anyway,
I think Rubio would have been the nominee had Trump not appeared.
Well, that's what I thought, and I thought he was going to beat. I thought he was going to beat Hillary.
I think he would have rode an anti-Cruz wave.
That's quite a wave.
I don't think he would have beaten Hillary Clinton, though. Wow. I think Hillary Clinton would have crushed him like an ant.
We will never know. But we do know I'm wrong. That's the important bit. Anything else about G before we move on?
No.
Nope. Okay. Oh, yeah. Time for this. Stats Nugget. Stats Nugget. Yeah! As we get towards the end of the year, I've got a few of these I've been holding on to. They are universally depressing. I apologise in advance. Here's one. I'll wipe the smile off. American women who are pregnant or who were pregnant in the past 42 days die by homicide at more than twice the rate that they die of bleeding or placental disorders, which are the leading causes of pregnancy-related deaths. So the pregnant women don't die by pregnancy-related deaths in America, they die by homicide. Between 2018 and 2019, 273 pregnant women or women who had just given birth were murdered in that 2-year period. Also, becoming pregnant increases the risk of death by homicide as well. Between the ages of 10 and 44, women who are or were pregnant in the past year are killed at a rate 16% higher than are women who are not pregnant. You'd be unsurprised to hear that 2/3 of those homicides occurred in the person's home, suggesting it was by her partner. Black women who are pregnant or were recently pregnant have up to nearly 3-fold higher risk of dying by homicide than those black women who are not pregnant. And they are the highest increase reported amongst any racial or ethnic group. The reason we have those figures is because they've only just, there was a study that only just put together those numbers for the first time. They didn't used to keep track of who was pregnant and who wasn't pregnant when murdered, but they just started keeping track, and there's a study on just now, and that's the numbers. I was quite surprised by that. I don't know if you have any response other than...
So did that come with any... Did that come with any assessment of whether this is increasing or what?
We don't know.
Or is this just how it is normally?
We don't know because they didn't keep track of who was pregnant and who was not from who was killed until the last 2-3 years. So we have no sense of what direction that's moving in. I imagine now they've found this, I imagine we're going to hear a lot more about this statistic in the coming years.
Yeah, because whatever direction it's moving in, it's completely fucked, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's the first of my cheery stat nuggets. Let's talk Congress. Infrastructure bill signed this week. Do you have anything to say about that?
No, I'm sure the peppers are all across the infrastructure bill.
Certainly they will across the policy. All I really want to add is that you can tell it really annoyed Trump. And I'll tell you how you can tell. Because his incoherence is directly proportional to how pissed off he is, generally speaking. And his statement, his message on the signing day was an absolute modern classic. I've been quoting a lot of people. Let me read you this. This is exceedingly long for Trump and so incoherent. Here we go. When the broken old crow, Mitch McConnell, agreed to a 2-month extension, he allowed the Democrats to get their act together and pass the $1.2 trillion non-infrastructure Green New Deal bill, which is a disaster for America in that only 11% of the money will be spent on real infrastructure, with most being spent on Green New Deal nonsense with big tax increases. Its actual cost is over $2 trillion, but the bigger disaster is yet to come in the next much larger version of the Green New Deal, which some people say will be $5 trillion. This was all allowed by Mitch McConnell's incompetence, and now I understand that a couple of Republican senators may get on board so they can have yet another and even bigger that they can have as a victory for the Democrats, while at the same time ensuring massive inflation and the destruction of our country as we know it. This is what happens when you allow a guy who lost an election to take over the office of the president. He obviously had no mandate, but they're changing our country and everything it stands for. Mitch McConnell couldn't stop the first bill, so 19 senators, including himself, joined in. That's what he does. If you can't beat him, join him. If he wasn't so stupid and didn't give the 2-month extension, he could have stopped it all. Now he and his rhino friends will allow a much bigger and far worse bill to pass, ruining our country while giving the Democrats a great political lift, all at the same time. People, with the help of the fake news media, have already forgotten about the horrendous Afghanistan withdrawal, an economy and jobs that are in shambles, and so many other things. The good news is they can't figure out inflation because hitting them right in the face. This is broken old Crow's fault. He could have won it all using the debt ceiling. They were ready to fold fold. Now the Democrats have a big victory and the wind at their back. McConnell is a fool and he damn well better stop their dream of communism bill and keep his senators in line, or he should resign now, something he should have done a long time ago. Use the debt ceiling like it should have been used, you old broken crow. To do so would hurt our country far less than this horrible bill. Any Republican in the House or Senate who votes for this bill will never ever get a Trump endorsement. Thank you and good luck.
Old broken crow.
He loves it. He loves the broken old crow, old broken crow.
I think that this is a good opportunity to... This is something I've been thinking about for a while, which is that there's always a lot of lamenting about how in the social media age and, you know, in general, in the internet age, you could even argue in the TV age, one of the effects is everything getting shorter, right? Shorter and shorter sound bites, shorter and shorter visual edits, shorter and shorter tweets, even though they did expand it from 140 to 280 characters. I disagree. I think that the problem is that there just seems to be an enormous amount of room for people to just go on at length with no internal or external editorial control at all. And, I mean, post-Twitter Trump is a good example of this. Even Twitter Trump was a good example of this once he learned how to thread tweets, which was a bit of a disaster. But the world actually just seems full of people who are at complete liberty to go on at total length with absolutely nothing stopping them. And it's just not good. I want editorial control. I realise this is hypocritical. This podcast is going to go for an hour and a half, and it's going to include long sections of unplanned soliloquizing from me. Fine, I will cop the charge of hypocrisy. But it's almost as if everyone saw in the early 2000s, Hugo Chavez had this TV show which would run on Sunday mornings called Hello, Mr. President, where he would give these like 6-hour uninterrupted addresses to the nation. And it's almost as if every other blowhard in the world looked at that and thought, why can't I do that?
You can soliloquize all you like as long as you don't call me a broken old crow, Dr.
Broken old crow. God, that is such a good one.
By the way, he's obviously not happy, Trump. Just a little reminder for Trump, because I know he watches and listens to this podcast. He does
Absolutely.
both. Yeah. He could have had this bill. He blew up the infrastructure talks because he was pissed off that they're investigating him. Like, if you recall, back in 2019, I think it was, he blew off a meeting with Schumer and Pelosi, and then he came out to a press conference. I got the quote here.
Yeah.
And he said, you probably can't go down two tracks. You can't go down the investigation track, or you can go down the investment track. Sorry, you can go down the investigation track, or you can go down the investment track. I walked into the room and I told Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, I want to do infrastructure. I want to do it more than you want to do it. But you know what? You can't do it under these circumstances. So get these phony investigations over with. So...
as much as the media has gleefully made this comparison, right? You can just see the schadenfreude, Biden doing what Trump couldn't do. I think it's a disservice to even kind of compare the two levels of effort. I mean, Trump made absolutely no effort with this whatsoever.
Yeah, that's true.
Like Biden, regardless of whether you agree with how he went about it, like there was clear, conscious focus going on here. I think it's a disservice to him to even compare it to what Trump tried to do.
It's not just that Trump didn't make an effort, it's that he sabotaged other people making an effort. Like Mnuchin was trying to do this. What's the guy's name? Cohen. Cohen was trying to do this as well. Like there were people who would seriously try and get an infrastructure package together. And they'd announce Infrastructure Week, and literally 2 hours later, Trump would be tweeting about something else. And that would be the end of it. They'd be off to the races. So, look, it's fair to say there's not much comparison. I am going to leave, I think, Build Back Better and Infrastructure Bill, because there's obviously going to be more Build Back Better coming, and everything goes back to inflation and concerns about inflation, and I feel like we had a good go at that before, so I don't want to get bogged down before people accuse us of being like Trump's message. So
you see Kathleen Parker, a conservative, she's your sort of typical conservative, never Trump columnist.
Yeah.
She described Build Back Better as something that looks like it belongs on a grade 5 diorama.
That's fair.
Yeah, look, I don't think much of the slogan, but Biden somehow managed to win an election while using it.
Yeah, well, yeah, he had some help, I feel. Okay, I'm going to skip past all this Congress stuff. If we have time at the end, I might come back to it. But otherwise,
we're not going to have time.
Let's go to execution news, Dave. That's a segment we don't have very often.
Yeah, so
it doesn't have a sting.
I want to draw your attention to this one because I think it exemplifies a lot of trends that are going on at the moment. So this is in Oklahoma. A man named Julius Jones, who at the age of 20, I think, back in 1999, was sentenced to death for a murder that happened in the course of a carjacking. Julius Jones has always maintained his innocence. He claims he wasn't even there at the time. He claims he heard about the murder, while watching it on television, and his conviction was based on the testimony of a co-defendant, right? So it's always, you're always potentially in a very murky zone. Now, the State Parole Board of Oklahoma had not only recommended that his sentence be commuted to life imprisonment, they recommended that it be commuted to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole, right? And they suggested that twice. And there have been a lot of high-profile allies attracted to this case. Everyone from Baker Mayfield, who was a very good football player for the University of Oklahoma, won the Heisman Trophy in 2017, now plays for the Cleveland Browns, to Kim Kardashian. She had a podcast episode about it, and one of her big things has been, ever since the Trump administration, criminal justice reform, trying to get people who she thinks have been hard done by the justice system out of the criminal justice system. But perhaps even more significantly, there have been a lot of conservative figures rallying around Julius Jones, including Ralph Reed, who's a very well-known Christian coalition figure, 2 Republican legislators from the state of Oklahoma, various well-known Christian figures in Oklahoma. And a lot of them, they're not just rallying around the idea that, the death penalty is unjustified in this case. They're actually rallying around the idea of innocence. That there's a serious possibility that he's innocent, and that would be an absolutely unconscionable and irreversible mistake if he was executed. Now, usually in religious coalitions against the death penalty, you don't usually see white evangelicals there. You see Catholics there who tend to be pretty consistently, at least in the Catholic hierarchy in the US, pretty consistently anti-death penalty. You see black evangelicals there. To see white evangelicals there is something really unusual. And the context of this also is that the last execution that happened in Oklahoma not that long ago appears to have been botched. The executed man actually vomited during the execution. There was a stay put on executions in Oklahoma in 2015 because of concerns about the stability of the drugs that they were using in the lethal injection. Of course, across the United States now, it's now increasingly hard to impossible to actually get the drugs that are required for lethal injections because the companies that make them don't want to have anything to do with them anymore. So execution is becoming more and more logistically difficult. Now, when the Supreme Court lifted the stay on Oklahoma executions on an unsurprising 6-3 split earlier this year, Oklahoma has essentially been rushing to get these executions done before it just becomes impossible because of problems with the drug supply. But this one, it just wasn't going to fly. There was too much opposition behind it, albeit the governor did wait till the very last moment. Governor Stitt, he waited until today, he waited until the day of the execution, and he only commuted it to life without the possibility of parole, not with the possibility of parole, as the state parole board has recommended. The victim's family is not happy about it at all, nor is Oklahoma's Attorney General. But I think that as I say, I think this reflects a few very interesting underlying trends. One is that execution is just becoming increasingly difficult for logistical reasons. Another is conservatives are increasingly behind innocence causes where they think that it's justified, and are even behind criminal justice reform in general, where they think it's justified. And when you get these kinds of coalitions coming together, then you will actually get possibilities like this.
Why do you think white evangelicals were into this one in particular? Because he played football?
No. It wasn't because of that. I think it was there were really particularly serious doubts about this guy's guilt. And, generally, in an execution, you obviously, in any criminal sentence, it's supposed to be beyond reasonable doubt. But in an execution, you want that to be an absolute slam dunk case. And it's just very clear that in this case, it wasn't. And, and there was enough sort of, even before conservatives got on board, there was enough celebrity attention being given to this case. That's the other important thing. To draw attention to it in a way that conservatives could get behind.
I guess one of the byproducts of the last few years is that conservatives are starting to get used to questioning the prosecutorial judgment of police.
Yes.
Like it was through the FBI because of FBI concerns and so forth. While you're giving us a legal update, do you want to go on with Malcolm X? I know you want to talk about that as well.
Oh yes. Yeah. Okay. So this is really interesting. This leads us into religion more generally, which is also on the PEP agenda today.
It is.
So just today, a New York judge vacated 2 convictions handed down in 1966 for the murder of Malcolm X. So, I mean, one of those guys is dead. Both of them spent 20 years in jail. The other one is still alive, but he's now 83 years old. But obviously, he was very happy to hear that. So, okay, let's rewind and actually tell the story of the assassination of Malcolm X. So, Malcolm X was a very significant African-American leader in the 1960s. He was often seen as the sort of more radical, more militant alternative to someone like Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Okay, so Malcolm X was very impatient with the civil rights movement, believed that the civil rights movement wasn't achieving anything, believed that there needed to be much greater militancy. And, he was about black power rather than about this sort of conventional civil rights agenda. Now, Malcolm X, for most of his career, was associated with the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam is a religious sect that originated in Detroit in the 1930s, but really took off in Chicago in the 1950s, which was where Malcolm X joined it, although he was originally from Michigan, under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad. Now, the Nation of Islam, despite the fact that it's got Islam in the name, when it started out, it actually had almost no relationship to Islam at all. It was actually started by Christians who believed that Christianity had become a tool of white supremacy, and so were seeking some other religious configuration that they believed would affirm African and Asian people. But the original founders, especially the original extremely mysterious Wallace Fard, about whom almost nothing is known, they didn't actually know anything about Islam. They knew about the Bible. So it was this weird sort of hodgepodge of beliefs. And Elijah Muhammad developed this very distinctive kind of mythology that certainly has nothing to do with Orthodox Islam. He claimed that the great black tribe of Shabazz had ruled the earth for 66 trillion years, until an evil scientist created white people who then enslaved Africans, enslaved other peoples of colour, and the prophecy was that they would continue to do so for another 6,000 years. This evil scientist, by the way, was known as Yaqub. Now, you won't find that anywhere in Orthodox Islam, so certainly under in the Elijah Muhammad version of the Nation of Islam, most Muslims considered it unacceptably heterodox. You know who else didn't like the Nation of Islam? The FBI. Yeah, the FBI hated the Nation of Islam. Not only did they regard them as not legitimately Muslim, they regarded them as not legitimately a religion. The FBI would actually put out pamphlets describing the differences between Orthodox Islam and the Nation of Islam and saying, look, the Nation of Islam, they're not even a religion. This is just an anti-white, anti-American political movement. So the FBI was constantly infiltrating the Nation of Islam. And, okay, so here's where Malcolm X comes in. Malcolm X was a very important and charismatic Nation of Islam leader who fell out with Elijah Muhammad. And as is the case with most sects under the rigid control of a single leader, when you fall out with that leader, you're on the outs. One of the reasons he fell out with him was because he found that Elijah Muhammad was not at all faithful to his wife. He was having affairs with 3 different members of the Nation of Islam organization. And so he felt that Elijah Muhammad was not upholding moral standards. So he began to question other things about the religion. And he decided Orthodox Islam actually offered a lot more in religious terms. So he defected from the Nation of Islam to Islam. He went and did the Hajj in Mecca. All of this is really well described in one of the most important books of the 20th century, which is the Autobiography of Malcolm X, that was written with Alex Haley. I highly recommend that if you're interested in American history at all. Anyway, so he was on the outs with the Nation of Islam. Now, it is known that the FBI was fostering that conflict between Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. So it was actually an FBI operative who let Malcolm X know about Elijah Muhammad's infidelities. Now, from that point on, the role in all of this of the FBI is murky. Spike Lee made a movie in 1992 called Malcolm X, based on the autobiography of Malcolm X, where in that movie, which also carries through to the assassination of Malcolm X, in that movie, the FBI knows that the assassination is going to happen, right? They've got people eavesdropping on all the relevant people, and you see these FBI agents, they hear about the plan, and they do nothing. Also, on the day that Malcolm X was assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom in Manhattan, there was an undercover New York police officer there, which has added to the controversy. So you won't be surprised to know that conspiracy theories that either the FBI or the NYPD had some kind of direct involvement in the assassination of Malcolm X have never gone away. Now, whether these have any credibility or not, the reason why they have so much currency is because both the NYPD and the FBI were constantly infiltrating the Nation of Islam, just like they were constantly infiltrating every other African-American group. So Malcolm X was killed by 3 people in the Audubon Ballroom, according to eyewitnesses. The 2 whose convictions have just been vacated were Muhammad Aziz, who is still alive, and Khalil Islam, who I believe is deceased. The other defendant, at the time, he went by the name Talmadge Hayer, although he changed his name to Mujahideen Abdul Halim later on. Now, he was the only one who was actually arrested after the assassination. Okay, the other 2 who were involved vanished. So basically 2 of them created a distraction. One of them went up and pulled the trigger. Talmadge Hayer was one of the ones who created the distraction. He was arrested. He was intercepted by the crowd. He was arrested. The other 2 vanished. And so the other 2, they were convicted on, once again, dodgy witness testimony. They maintained that they weren't even in the Audubon Ballroom that day. And furthermore, Talmadge Hayer, Mujahid Abdul Halim, he even said he signed sworn affidavits saying that they had nothing to do with it. Okay, and he was the one that everyone knows did have something to do with it. So this conviction was always very dodgy, and people who had been watching this never bought into the idea that these two guys were actually involved. One of the reasons why this case got a lot of recent publicity was actually because of a Netflix series, Who Killed Malcolm X, which I haven't seen yet, so I can't attest to it. But that apparently came out with the theory that it was three Nation of Islam guys from Newark, so Tomei Chao was one of them, not anybody who was in New York, which is the two whose convictions have been vacated. So this was actually, if not front page news, it was front web page news on both the New York Times and Washington Post. It's a pretty big deal. It's been a big November for Nation of Islam publicity because last week, we didn't pick up on this in PEP, and I'm not sure if you're aware, last week, Marjorie Taylor Greene was singing the praises of Louis Farrakhan because of his stance against vaccines. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Louis Farrakhan was the guy who revived the Nation of Islam, right? So after Elijah Muhammad's death, Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, he wanted the whole of the Nation of Islam to move to Orthodox Islam. He basically, and he was in exile with Malcolm X for a while, he basically took the Nation of Islam to Orthodox Islam, changed the name of it, changed the whole belief structure of it, and it became just another sect of Islam. But not everyone who had been in the Nation of Islam was actually happy about this. And one of them was Louis X. So born Louis Walcott, was a calypso singer. I actually, in preparation for this, I tried to listen to some of his calypso on YouTube, but I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to listen to his song "Ugly Woman" for more than 30 seconds.
Therefore, from a logical point of view, you better marry a woman uglier than you. From a logical point of view, always marry a woman uglier than you.
Anyway, changed the name to Louis X, was a rival of Malcolm X. He then basically took this rump of the Nation of Islam back to that Elijah Muhammad belief system in the 80s and 90s and actually made it a lot bigger than it had been, at least for a little while. I mean, it had been pretty prominent when Muhammad Ali had been a member. But it was Louis Farrakhan who organised the Million Man March, which got a huge amount of publicity in the 90s. Farrakhan is was just a publicity machine. He had a real knack for it. I wouldn't say he's particularly good at anything else, but publicity he does really well. For a time, there's this weird period where the Nation of Islam actually became popular with conservatives because they were very good at meting out vigilante justice to drug dealers. So there was even this period where, like, the Nation of Islam was getting security contracts in major American cities. Of course, Louis Farrakhan's constant stream of anti-Semitic invective kind of dampened that a little bit and reduced him to a rightfully marginal position in American life. But he's never gone away. His following has never gone away. I have friends who used to live right across the street from him in Hyde Park in Chicago. So I've seen his house. I actually saw his house from the FBI listening post that they had set up across the street, which is pretty cool. Big moment for me. Remember what I said earlier about how there was going to be some unplanned and ill-advised soliloquizing going on? Well, you're getting it now. This is exactly the problem that I'm talking about. Farrakhan in 2012 wanted all of the Nation of Islam members to actually do the Dianetics program, and it was being rumoured that he'd sold the whole church to Scientology.
Well, that Shabazz story sounded very Scientology, I have to say.
Yeah. I think he basically backed Trump in 2016. So it's been quite a journey. Let's put it that way. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is just the latest step on that journey. By the way, I actually wrote about all of this in my book, Religious Persecution and Political Order in the United States. So I won't put my own book on the reading list, but if you want to know more about the Nation of Islam, you can read about it there. But
I can put on the reading list.
Read the Autobiography of Malcolm X instead. It's a much better book.
That's Alex Haley?
That's Malcolm X with Alex Haley. Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. I will be putting that on the reading list. I don't even know where to start with comments on that, so
Really?
I'm just going to move on. I just feel like while you were going there, I was accumulating questions and now I've forgotten them all. Let's just go talking about a different jailbird, shall we? While one is coming out of jail, another one's going into jail, and that is Steve Bannon. We talked a little bit about this on the show, but I want to develop what I discussed on the show a little bit further.
Yeah.
He's been indicted for contempt of Congress, facing 30 days to 1 year, 2 counts of that. I won't go over what we've already said before. He does have the least convincing executive privilege claim of all time because he wasn't in the executive, and there's no evidence that they had any serious private conversations with Trump anyway.
Is he actually claiming executive privilege?
Yeah, that's what this is about.
Well, he's the executive of his podcast.
Yeah, I don't think that's the executive.
He was the executive of a highly successful World of Warcraft gold farming operation.
Once again, that's not what the questions are about. The questions are about Trump, and he is claiming that all these conversations are protected by executive privilege, even though he was fired 3 years earlier from the executive. But anyway, it's a very unconvincing claim. But the thing is, there's a lot of people going, "Oh yeah, get ready to go to jail, Steve." Like I just hinted at before, but I'll tell you,
no one goes to jail for this.
Well, he is not going to jail because he has such an obvious defence. I'll just tell you this right now. He has the world's most obvious defence, which I said on the show before, but for you guys, when you're taking the advice of your lawyer, you're not going to go to jail for that. They need to show that he had improper intent in order to convict him of contempt of court. He's just going to say, my lawyer told me that I have executive privilege. That's why I made the claim. I'm following my lawyer's advice. You don't go to jail for that.
Unfortunately, there are enough dodgy and desperate lawyers hanging around the Trump camp that it is plausible that there would be an actual lawyer with an actual law degree who's passed a bar exam in some state who would actually have said, "Oh yeah, you've definitely got executive privilege."
He has a lawyer, Dave. He has a lawyer, and his lawyer is saying that. It's not just John Eastman with a moustache. He's got an actual lawyer.
Wow.
So yeah, he's not going to be going to jail. And as you just said, it's very rare for people to go to jail for contempt of Congress. Anyway, the only person who has that I know of is G.Gordon Liddy. Who was actually convicted of about 1 million things.
Yes,
and so it was just, take your pick what he's going to jail for there.
But did we ever do a obituary to G.Gordon Liddy?
I don't think we ever did.
On the show?
No, I don't think we ever have.
Yeah, because he died earlier this year.
Oh. R.I.P.
I think when I was 15, I was doing work experience in the political science department at UNSW, and Elaine Thompson, who was the department's professor of American politics, lent me this copy of G.Gordon Liddy's autobiography, Will. And it was that gave me, I think, my just insatiable taste for fucked up political biographies.
Wow.
It was a very formative moment in my life because just around the same age I was reading like Bob Woodward's books about Clinton, but that's just mainstream stuff. I felt like here was the real deal. Like here was a subject that could not fail to be interesting. But I think ever since then, I've maintained this interest in the extremes of politics.
You might be G.Gordon Liddy's greatest legacy, Dr. Dave.
I might be. I will accept that mantle.
he went to jail, but Bannon is not going to be going to jail. This is all gravy for Bannon. I mean, I know it's an obvious thing to say, but it's zero risk for him. Like, he's just not going to jail. Maximum payoff. He's going to raise so much money for his legal defence fund from the MAGA heads. He's back in Trump's good graces because of this as well, which he was pining for Trump for the last 3 years, and he's finally back in his... And most of all, it makes him seem relevant, which he just hasn't been for so long. I mean, the odds are, from my point of view... Look, I don't know what he's got, but I reckon the odds are his insights probably are of no use to the Commission anyway. Like, they're going on about him because he talked stuff up in the War Room, his podcast. Yeah. But he talks everything up in the War Room. You listen to the War Room, he's like that every episode about everything.
No, I have not listened to the War Room. I'm not going to recommend that anyone...
Oh, no. That's not going in the homework, don't worry. His podcast is the opposite of us. Like, he's all about action and revolution and big changes are right around the corner, Dr. Dave, whereas we're all, this is depressing, life is shit, let's talk about trucking movies instead.
I never suggested that anyone should do anything apart from reading the odd book.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, but this is what he's like. I mean, I'll read you some of the quotes here. This is what he said that was so revealing that people say, oh, we got to get his testimony. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow, he said. And so many people said, if I was in a revolution, I would be in Washington. Well, this is your time in history. It's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen. Okay, it's going to be quite extraordinarily different. All I can say is strap in. And then you made this happen and tomorrow it's game day. So strap in. Let's get ready. It's all converging and now we're on the point of attack tomorrow. Now, Liz Cheney said about that, Mr. Bannon's own public statements make clear he knew what was going to happen before it did. No, it doesn't. It doesn't make that clear at all. He could have been talking about the Senate voting to overturn the election. He could have been talking about Mike Pence turning. He could have been talking about anything. He could have just been raving. This is what Bannon's like. And now he's going to be able to act like he was in the know for the next 6 months while these court cases go on, go, oh, I've got some interesting information I'm not going to share with you. He's going to love it. It's just going to be, he's going to be like a pig in mud. So look, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have been indicted. He definitely should have been indicted because you need to, they had no other choice because you need to impose consequences for people just flagrantly disrespecting Congress. I've got no problems with that. But all I'm saying is that he ain't going to jail and he's loving it. And there is nothing we can do about it. That's my take on the ban thing. Do you have any take on that?
Yeah, look, I don't have anything to add to that.
No, okay. No. All right, well, what's interesting to me, though, is the way Republicans are threatening the Democrats as a result of this, and also the Marjorie Taylor Greene, the stripping of her assignments and committee assignments, and also we're about to get to Gosar as well, him as well. There's a lot of threats being levelled at the moment. Kevin McCarthy explicitly said that Republicans have a long list of those that they plan to strip of committee assignments, including, he has named them, Ilhan Omar, Eric Swalwell, Maxine Waters. Jim Banks said the same thing. Mo Brooks had a tweet. Socialists, this is when Marjorie Taylor Greene was in the news. Socialists stripped Marjorie Taylor Greene committee assignments for alleged pre-election conduct. Bad idea. Socialists subvert democracy and diss those who elected them in MTG. When GOP recaptures House in 2022, this precedent lets GOP dictate all socialist committee assignments. Lauren Babert, who we're going to talk about a bit more as well, said, quote, now that Democrats have started these politically motivated indictments for contempt of Congress, I look forward to seeing their reactions when we keep that same energy as we take back the House next year. Future House Judiciary Chairman Rep. G.Gordon, geez, imagine that, pledged that the Biden administration will spend virtually all its time under subpoena if the Republicans win back the House in 2022. Okay, so what do you think, Dave? Do you think that they're going to reap the wind?
Thing is, so if Republicans take the House in 2022, what else is Congress going to be doing apart from increasingly ridiculous acts of political theatre?
Yeah, they don't do policy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, I would not be particularly afraid if I were Democrats about the prospect of possibly losing positions on a committee that is not going to do anything because Republicans will be in charge of the House of Representatives.
Look, that is a fair point. But also, I just think it's laughable to suggest that they would have held back if not for Marjorie Taylor Greene's resolution.
Yeah.
I mean, these people are hardly the keepers of tradition. I mean, like they're hardly conservative, small c conservative. They need to go to, their whole thing is they need to go scorched earth all the time to prove that they fight. And so it's not going to hold back. And this is what I flagged before. I foreshadowed that where I was going to go was they're clearly going to impeach Biden. It's just so obvious there's going to be revenge. Like, it doesn't matter what it's for. They're going to find a reason to impeach Biden, whether it's Afghanistan or whatever. I mean, there were House Judiciary Committee members who are Republicans in 2016 who announced that they were going to impeach Hillary before the election.
Yes, yeah.
Like, it's just, like, they need no incentive. And by the way, I know Joe Biden watches this podcast with Trump. They sit together and watch his podcast. My advice to you, Joe, is embrace the impeachment when it comes. Testify directly. Chuck a Clinton. Just be Mr. Reasonable while you're being impeached, because they're going to look like idiots. Because they're going to go nuts.
I think when Biden's best shot of re-election in 2024 is, well, I mean, first of all, recovering economy, recovery from COVID. But it's Republicans making gigantic asses of themselves.
Yeah, totally.
Like that's his best show. And it's a promise to return to the Trump show, which even secretly some Republicans don't actually want to go back to.
Yeah, it's true. But the thing for me is that what I want to add to this is that, because a few people have made the point he's going to get impeached. What I want to add to this is the reason I object to this and the reason why it bothers me is not because it hurts Democrats. I don't really care about Democrats. I think it's a shame because what this in effect does is remove a means of accountability for Congress. It makes stripping assignments mean nothing. It makes censorship. We'll get to the censure of Goza. Like if you flip it with it, it means nothing. It means impeachment is going to mean nothing. I feel like they've already been defined down during this Congress. I mean, as I said, I'm about to talk about Goza, but they're about to be defined down even further to the point where Congress will have no means of communicating displeasure with something that deserves to be communicated displeasure of. Yeah, they're depriving themselves of tools. Not that they care, because I think a lot of these people who talk like this, ironically, don't even care about power. Like, to them, the reason they're in Congress, I think, is celebrity as much as anything else.
Oh yeah.
Like it's like if you've got no shame, you become a reality TV star, and if you've got no shame and you're ugly, you become a populist politician. Like, it's just kind of it's just rabble rousing, It's got no point. It's going nowhere, and so they probably don't even care. But I do care about the institution of Congress, and there aren't many tools they have left. The presidency's completely taken over, and what I don't think these people like Babbitt are considering are that they are in the process of destroying the few tools remaining that Congress have at their disposal.
Yeah, no, they don't care. They don't give a shit.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
There was another example this week, this Paul Gosar thing. Do you have anything else to say about that before I get to Paul Gosar?
No.
No? Okay, all right. Paul Gosar tweeted out an anime clip a few weeks back, supposedly made by his staff, who obviously aren't doing anything else. Especially congressional staff, and they're making anime clips. I'm going to play it over the top of me talking, describing what's happening. So if you haven't seen it and you're listening to this, watch the video. There's no audio that's of much use, so it's mostly boring footage, to be honest. I'm not sure if you've seen it, Dr. Dave. Most people haven't seen it; they've just seen the highlights. It's mostly boring footage of border crossers and border patrol, and then after about 40 seconds of this footage of border crossers and border patrol, there's super fast footage of some anime title sequence with Gozar's head superimposed over one character, but really fast. It's not like the viral clips of Trump from 2 or 3 years ago where you saw him like at leisure, like you'd see it really clear. Now it's like it's flying around really, really fast. You can barely make it out. And I think Bobert's head is there for a moment as well. It's really fast. And then you see AOC's head superimposed on another character, and she's been like slashed by a sword for like a split second. You can barely make out it's AOC. It is so fast. The only character you see at length is Biden at one point in time. You see for a long time, and he gets apparently vanquished at the end. It's a terrible video, I should say. Super unoriginal, very badly made. Yet if you look at the comments under it on Twitter and YouTube, it's actually very depressing, the comments. So many people think it's the greatest thing ever, which makes me wonder what these people want from their politicians. Do they want them to send out viral clips? Is that what they want? You know, like especially bad viral clips. Like isn't the rest of the world there?
If you're a commenter on this, then yes.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, but just
yes, this is exactly what you want.
I feel like that given how bad the comments, how bad the clip is, like just how shit it is, it makes me think that it's not even about tweeting out random shit. It's about trolling, about the intent to troll. That's what they like. They like the intent to troll. Even if you don't succeed, it's just the intent to troll that they like, which is a real classic, be careful what you wish for, because that is exactly what we're getting with increasing number of politicians these days. Anyway, so that was the clip. And then people went crazy. Goz's staff put out a statement, quote, "It's a symbolic cartoon. It's not real life. Congressman Goza cannot fly. The hero of the cartoon goes after the monster, the policy monster of open borders. I will always fight to defend the rule of law, securing our borders and the America First agenda." Then he took the clip down. Democrats censured him 223 to 207. That was including Kinzinger and Cheney were on the Democrat side. Censures don't mean much to the extent they mean anything anymore. They just mean he was told off.
Yes, yeah.
It hasn't happened much. It's happened like 23 times before in history. But they also took him off the oversight committee, which AOC was on, because they were talking about the violence against women angle. I mean, like I can't emphasize enough. AOC is barely in this clip. Like she's there for like maybe half a second, maybe. But this very quickly became all about her being threatened by this.
Okay. I will defend that focus, right? Because, why is AOC in there at all?
Yeah.
It's because she is this particular focal point for that section, for that unhinged section of the Republican Party. Now, AOC's got a very long political career in front of her. I would say, it's odds on she will be a presidential candidate at some point. Judging by what we have seen so far, it is going to be like the ugliness directed at Obama multiplied by the ugliness directed at Hillary Clinton. Yeah. And then, squared, basically, because of who AOC is and what she represents. Nobody attracts, with the possible exception of Ilhan Omar, quite that level of virulence. I think she's got more legitimate concerns than anybody else in Congress about the likelihood of actually being a victim of violence.
I think that is...
And the fact that she was in there at all, they need to put that in to placate these bloodthirsty crazies. So I would defend that focus.
I reckon I agree with you that about the threat that she is under generally, making that there is definitely a very unhealthy focus on her from people. I mean, there's clearly a sexual component to it as well, which makes it even ickier. Like as soon as she got there was this fixation with her from people who you suspected secretly, who I secretly suspected secretly were really into her and had trouble dealing with that. Anyway, well, let's keep on. We're a bit short on time here.
So it's that combined with the fact that every Republican nobody who wants to make a name for themselves does it by trying to go after her. right? So whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene literally following her around, screaming at her, or any one of these sort of innumerable people who've challenged AOC to a debate, like that's how you raise your profile in Republican circles.
Given that we've only got a few minutes of you left, Dave,
yes.
And then I'll continue saying what I think about all this on Chaz Unleashed, because I'm not going to finish the topic without actually saying what I think. I want your take then, given especially what you just said, on Nancy Pelosi's quote about why she was pushing the censure motion. It's an emergency. It's violence against women, workplace harassment. Really, I think legal matters in terms of threatening a member and the President of the United States. Okay, so do you think that this... I take your point about the unhealthy fixation that crazies have with AOC, but do you think this video in itself was a threat or violence against women?
That's a very difficult question, and I would need to spend more than 3 minutes to give a considered answer to that.
That's a shame. Okay.
Also, I haven't seen the video, right? It would be grossly irresponsible for me to actually comment on that, because I generally do make a point of avoiding just seeing gratuitously stupid shit which was only put out there for the purpose of getting attention.
Well, that is an important point as well. I'm glad you put that qualification rather than just sounding off on something you hadn't seen. Okay. Well, look, I am going to continue on talking about.
All right.
Talking about this.
Everybody enjoy Chaz Unleashed.
Oh, I'm going to be so unleashed. Oh my God. I reckon this time I'm not just going to take the leash off. I'm going to destroy the leash. It's never going back on again. It's not going to be a very long one because we gave you some value here. But
we did give you some value for this podcast that you get for free. Yes.
Well, normally,
always worth the price.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm not sure we do give full value even for free, but this time we have. And
by the way, we will. Sorry, I'm unilaterally saying this. We will never go to a paid model.
Oh yeah, no, you can.
Fuck that shit. Yeah, never going to. We are never going to a paid model. As long as PEP exists, it will be free. That's the true meaning of freedom.
Absolutely, that is absolutely smart. And you are definitely right. We're never going to a paid model. I am notorious for being pathetic with money and never making money, no matter what opportunities I have.
That's the main reason why we'll never go to a paid model, because nobody trusts Chaz with money.
I don't just mean that. I mean like when I was at uni, I used to work at a suburban newspaper where they were struggling they were going bankrupt, and so I didn't cash my checks because I thought, I don't need the money, let them have it, it'll be charity. And so I was working I was working like 50 hours a week, and I wasn't cashing my checks. And when my dad found out, oh my God, he kicked my ass so hard.
I think this is going to be one of the few instances where I kind of have some sympathy with Mr. Licciardello. I will just say one last thing about this, because we are increasingly looking at a media landscape, podcast landscape, the era of Substack, whatever, where more and more people are going to these sort of paid subscriber models, and you're now faced with this sort of overwhelming choice. One of the reasons I would never want to go to one of those models for PEP is because there are so many more people out there who do actually need the money, channeling young Chaz there. We are not among... There are some really, really great people out there who actually, do rely on this kind of monetization for an income. So that's who your money should be going to. Don't pay for subscriptions to people who've got other sources of income or are already really well established or doing well. Subscribe to the ones who actually need it.
I 100% agree. Great words to go out on, Dave. I'll see you later, and I'm going to see you guys after the white flash on Chaz Unleashed. Hello, people who have ventured beyond the white flash to the unleashed zone. I have had my standard traditional kip under the desk and I'm ready to continue. We've finished the show. Before I pick up where Dave left off, I just want to tell you how Paul Goza reacted to the well, during the hearing, this is what he said of the censuring. He said, "I do not espouse violence towards anyone. I never have. It was not my purpose to make anyone upset. I voluntarily took the cartoon down, not because it itself was a threat, but because some thought it was. Out of compassion for those who generally felt offense, I self-censored." He also said that the video directly contributes to the understanding and the discussion of the real-life battle resulting from this administration's open border policies. Lol. How does it contribute to the understanding of open border policies? This inane cartoon the stuff has whipped up and he tweeted out without comment. I don't think it has contributed to the understanding of border policies at all. It might have got some publicity, but contributing to understanding, let's put it this way. If this is the best that Gozar can do to contribute to the discussion, then he's in the wrong job. I feel like he should be able to contribute a little bit more to the discussion than this cartoon. By the way, that bit about him feeling compassion for causing offense, that's obviously bullshit, because he retweeted the video again as soon as he was censured. It was like a little kid throwing a tanty. But anyway, so that's his defense. Like, it's a rather predictable one, saying he didn't mean to hurt anyone. It's just a joke, and the bit about contributing to the discussion I didn't expect. But anyway, that's his point of view. Okay, so back to the Pelosi stance about it being an emergency, it being violence against women, it being a threat. It's been a threat, threatening a member. Okay, Dave said it was complicated. I agree, it's complicated. What I think isn't complicated is that this is not violence against women, in my view. This shitty video. One of my peeves of modern days, to sound like an old fogey, is that I hate the way people use the word violence to refer to almost anything these days. Like, violence is a very special concept. Violence is not an anime video. Violence is special, and it's specially bad. It should be treated as specially bad. I don't like the way silence can be violence now. I don't like how people saying mean things about you is violence now. No, violence is getting hit. Violence is getting hurt physically. And I think violence is too much a special category to be defined down to anything that you don't like. So no, I don't think this is violence against women. The real question is it a threat in any way? Now, not obviously, in my view, it is clearly not a direct, serious threat. And I don't think anyone thinks that. I don't think if I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt here, I don't think anyone seriously thinks that Paul Gozar was suggesting that people should stab AOC. If they actually thought that he was literally saying people should go and do this, and he was actually physically threatening her, I think they would treat Paul Gozar differently. They'd treat him like a psycho. They wouldn't just censure him. They wouldn't just censor him and then move on. They would do whatever they could to get rid of him completely, like he is a monster. They would have security all over him. They would have cameras on him. They would call the police. They would not forget it. They would be going on about it for as long as he's in Congress. If you had some psycho coming up to AOC with a knife and going, "I'm going to stab you," you wouldn't forget that. You would treat them like a monster for as long as you know them and do whatever you can to get rid of them. That's not what they're doing, because I don't think they interpreted it as an actual serious threat. But that's not to say that there aren't threatening elements to it. So this is where it gets a bit complicated. I think what people do think about this, that it adds to a culture that could eventually, even accidentally, spit out something that does become violence in the real world at some point in time. I don't think people are thinking that Paul Gozar is actually directly, intentionally threatening AOC. At least I don't think they think that, but I do think they think he's contributing to a set of circumstances that are snowballing over time and escalating over time. And one day they might eventuate in a situation where there is actual violence. And to that extent, they are a threat. To illustrate what I'm talking about, I think AOC herself had a much more sophisticated take than Nancy Pelosi had. Unsurprisingly, she's probably thought a lot about this over the last few years because she's right in the middle of the maelstrom. She's also, I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with AOC in that I think she says some dumb things at times, but I think she's a smart person. I think she's a serious person. I think that she, as much as she gets mocked by conservatives, I think she does put a lot of thought into some of her positions. And I think this is an example. So I'd like to play you a minute 40 of her talking through during the hearing what her position on all this stuff is, and then I'll discuss it.
But I have seen other members of this party advance the argument, including Representative Gosar himself, the illusion that this was just a joke. That what we say and what we do does not matter so long as we claim a lack of meaning. Now, this nihilism runs deep, and it conveys and betrays a certain contempt for the meaning and importance of our work here. That what we do, so long as we claim that it is a joke, doesn't matter. That what we say here doesn't matter. That our actions every day as elected leaders in the United States of America doesn't matter. That this chamber and what happens in it doesn't matter. And I am here to rise to say that it does. Our work here matters. Our example matters. There is meaning in our service. And as leaders in this country, when we incite violence with depictions against our colleagues, that trickles down into violence in this country. And that is where we must draw the line, independent of party, identity, or belief.
Let me break down a few of the things she said there. I agree with her that it's not about her in particular. Like I said, she's there for a fraction of a second. I do take Dr. Dave's point about the context in which she exists, but nevertheless, I don't think this video was about her. I think she's an obligatory box that every conservative ticks, especially populist conservative, when they're having to go at Democrats. You just have to have a go at AOC. And I hate that on her behalf. It's not fair, but I don't think it's particularly directed at her. She's just unfortunately completely tied up in the culture war between the right and the left. The political culture war, that is. I also agree with her that this is about what Congress is willing to accept. I think that's all the censure is. It's a motion where Congress makes a statement about what it's willing to accept and what it's not willing to accept. Now, obviously it has no precedent value. From generation to generation, they'll make different determinations. It doesn't necessarily have any influence. Although maybe a little bit, but not a huge amount. But I do agree that that's what we should be, that's the bar that we should be considering. What does Congress accept? What does Congress not accept? If we proceed with the fiction that censorship could do something, that's the bar that we should be hanging our actions on, I feel. What I don't agree with is, why is this in particular something that they are not willing to accept? It's a tweet. It wasn't even in Congress. To me, this tweet was like a juvenile troll. It spoke poorly of Gosar. It spoke poorly of his staff. It spoke poorly of his supporters who were cheering it on. But why is that juvenile troll so heinous? We remember, there's only been 23 censure motions in the history of the House. I feel like a lot worse things happen than that tweet. Having said that, I understand how AOC could differ. I understand how she could say, you know what, regardless of whether there's only been 23 motions, regardless if this is just a tweet, if we are going to set up a set of behaviours that we accept and behaviours we don't accept, this should be on the side of what we don't accept. It adds nothing. It's not real debate. It is just juvenile behaviour. People in Congress should not behave like this. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, they did not behave like this. This is new. Even leaving aside the Twitter element of it, outside Congress, people did not behave like this 15 years ago. They didn't show these videos in whatever technology was available at that point in time. They didn't send them out on email lists. This is new behaviour and we should not approve of it. I understand why people would say that. Personally, I think you need to be very careful where you draw the line, because I think when you draw a line, you should be very strict about that line. You shouldn't let anything go over that line. And personally, I don't care about stupid videos that make people who send them look like idiots. Personally, so we differ on that regard. Okay, but this is where we get to, I think, the best point she makes, though, which I think is a really interesting area, where the bit where she says, this shows an attitude that as long as you say I'm joking, you can say anything. And it creates a feeling that nothing that anyone does matters. I think that's a sophisticated critique, and I think it's true. I also think, though, that we shouldn't take everything related to Congress people seriously. It's not all or nothing, in my view. I think their job should be taken seriously. When they are doing their job in Congress, it should be taken very seriously. Their crafting of policy should be taken seriously. Their attempt to communicate with their constituents should be taken seriously. I'm not sure their tweets necessarily need to be taken seriously, though. I think it's possible for one person to be taken seriously sometimes and not taken seriously other times. And I think when they're performing the functions of Congress, that should be taken seriously. And when they're not, I don't have an opinion, to be honest. I'm comfortable with a world where Congress people can behave like clowns when they're not participating in Congress in an official function. Let's put it that way. And I'm not convinced that there is a particular reason why we should have to take them seriously at all times, and they should be taken seriously. Now, obviously, AOC might disagree with that. I do agree with AOC that there is a general devolution of Congress into a body where nothing they do matters. Whether they're in Congress or not, they just talk shit. I'm about to play an example from Lauren Gilbert, who at all times is at level 10 trolling. She never does anything that's not trolling. I've never heard her say anything serious at all. She's never wanted to be taken seriously. She is a performance artist. She is not your standard Congress person, but there are more and more Lauren Gilberts out there. She is just an upgrade on Matt Gaetz, who is 95% not serious. Every now and then he gets serious when he's talking about maybe military engagement overseas. He gets serious at that point in time. Or sometimes when he's talking about other Congress people, he gets serious. But most of the time he's not. Lauren Gilbert is 100% of the time not. So yes, there is a devolution going on. And maybe this, and I think that is a problem. I think it's a massive problem, the devolution. Maybe this is part of the problem. Maybe this is part of the reason for that problem. I'm not sure it has to be. I think people aren't drawing a line that I would like them to. They're not drawing a line between serious conduct and non-serious conduct. They're basically just bifurcating into politicians who are serious all the time or unserious all the time. And I don't like that process. Maybe AOC is right that allowing these stupid tweets accelerates that process. I personally don't think censoring people stops that. I just think it makes the unserious people more unserious. Let's take the actual censorship hearing. Lauren Gilbert, I've just told you, she's a 100% performance artist troll at all times. This is how she responded. This was her speech during the censure hearing.
The Speaker has designated the floor to discuss members' inappropriate actions. Shall we? The Jihad Squad member from Minnesota has paid her husband, and not her brother husband, the other one, over $1 million in campaign funds. This member is allowed on the Foreign Affairs Committee while praising terrorists. A Democrat chairwoman incited further violence in the streets outside of a courthouse. And then the cherry on top, my colleague and 3-month presidential candidate from California, who is on the Intelligence Committee, slept with Fang Fang, a Chinese spy. Let me say that again. A member of Congress who receives classified briefings was sleeping with the enemy. This is unacceptable, and this would never be...
Time's expired. Gentleman from Florida.
Okay, so that was 100% performance art. There's no way that she's actually offended about anything she's acting offended about. She even sounds like she's reading a script. All the gratuitous insults, none of that is meant to be taken seriously. And by the way, she carries on about these same examples all the time. She loves it, and it's the Fox News hit list. She shows that she fights back, and if you want to carry on like that, well, I'm going to do this, and it's just all a show. It's 100% unserious. That to me says nothing matters a lot more than tweeting an anime clip does. As stupid as the anime clip was, and it was very stupid, that wasn't part of their official, GoStar's official activities. This was part of Lauren Babbitt's official activities. And this is how she carries on with all her official activities. It's constant showmanship at all times, zero substance. Now that is nothing matters. You can't censure that though. You can't censure someone just being a constant performer and moron. You're allowed to be a clown. You are. And in fact, you're rewarded. She is going to continue to raise heaps of money because she's a clown. She's going to continue to be reelected because she's a clown. That is what the people want, at least some of the people. And that's kind of the problem. And it's a hard problem to fix. It's the old H.L. Mencken quote. I haven't written it down. This is just off the top of my head. I don't remember the exact words, but something like democracy is where people choose what they want, and they get it good and hard. Something like that. It's about how you get what you ask for with democracy, and people are asking for Babbitt, and that's the problem. The problem is us, or at least America. I hope it's not us. I don't want that in Australia. Anyway. So that is its own problem, but I don't think it's been solved by censorship. I don't know how you solve it. I'm really worried about the direction of American Congress. Then at the end, AOC gets back to this trickles down to actual violence. Once again, she's not suggesting that the actual anime clip itself is a direct threat or a direct incitement necessarily, so much as it's part of something that trickles down to actual violence. How do you know that? What do you base that on? Like, did we just assert this all the time now? Oh, this is going to end up with actual violence. People talking about the Wuhan virus is going to end up with violence against Asian Americans, which, by the way, the numbers did not reflect that at all. We constantly talk about vilification leading to violence as this inexorable consequence. I'd like to see some proof of that. I've never seen proof of that in any context. They said about Chappelle as well, that it was going to lead to transgender violence. His comedy act, which was The Closer, which was like 70% about transgender woke issues. I remember spending decades hearing conservatives suggesting that TV and video games would result in real world violence, and there was never any evidence of that. But I'll tell you now, sitting there watching thousands of hours of violence on TV and video games, it makes more sense that would lead to actual violence than one anime video or calling the COVID the Wuhan virus. That seems to be an extremely tenuous connection. The modern day suggestions of what leads to violence. I don't think any of it leads to violence myself. But if you think I'm wrong, then show me some evidence. I would say. Yeah, I don't think this is good. I think it creates it's part of creating a negative culture. I agree with that, but I don't see the connection to eventual violence, which I reiterate should be special, should be treated specially, not just something they throw around in the debate. My take is I agree with Major, Peter Major. He's the Republican the freshman Republican who voted to impeach Trump. He seems like a pretty brave, honourable dude. His take on this was, as someone who's faced death threats, and he certainly has, and had a senior party official reference my assassination, I take political violence seriously. Rep. Gosar disgraced himself with his actions leading up to January 6th, and he's disgraced himself further by associating with anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers. I'll talk about that in a second. Sadly, disgracing oneself with anti-Jewish associates isn't a rare occurrence for a handful of my colleagues on either side of the aisle, but today's vote wasn't about these actions. It was about dumb anime clip. The last censure of a member of Congress was in 2010. Today, Democratic leadership did not present an objective, articulate standard for censure in the absence of an ethics committee ruling or formal legal action. That's a good point. That hasn't been mentioned much. Rep. Gosar's conduct has been contemptible, but calling that video a death threat is an unreasonable exaggeration that ignores why political violence is such a threat. Leaders embracing authoritarian lies. The American people deserve a Congress that functions according to reason, not emotion. I agree. There needs to be some standards. You need to set a standard, and it's not necessarily an objective standard, but a standard with some detail, like some semi-legalistic standard of where the bar is and what you're aiming for. Just flying by the seat of your pants is just going to lead to partisan retribution on either side. When he was talking about anti-Semitic and Holocaust deniers, Paul Gosar is the only member of Congress who consorts with flat out anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers, in particular Nick Fuentes, who's we've talked about a couple of times on this podcast. He's a nasty dude. He is a real anti-Semite, a real Holocaust denier. That's not me slurring him. He would embrace both labels. That's that. And Nick and Paul Gosar speaks at his conferences. He hasn't flat out defended him, but he has said, we all have different points of view. As long as we're all pushing for America first, that's his kind of attitude. It's yeah, I think I agree with Major that is much more of a concern than this anime clip. But anyway, I've said enough about this. All I would add is that I do need to qualify. I understand these people are swimming in death threats and intimations of violence. They really are, especially AOC. It explains why they get worked up about harmless video. You need to understand that to get in their heads that they've just got hundreds, if not thousands, of death threats just surrounding them. And that does horrible things to your head. Like, I've had a few. It really fucks with you. Honestly, it really does. You become paranoid and you become very sensitive. So they do live in a special context. I can understand why anything that adds to that context makes them angry. I understand that. I also think it explains why Gosar is a ghoul. He knows that. He would get death threats himself. So why would he do that in this context? Why it suggests he's a horrible person. Like, having had the experience myself, I get very sensitive on other people's behalf when I know that they are subject to threats, to real threats and real intimidation. I don't know why Gosar doesn't get sensitive to it as well. I think I can only conclude that he lacks empathy, or he's just inhuman. He just doesn't care. I don't know. But the bottom line is these guys are public servants. Everything they do has public repercussions. So them acting like something is a heinous threat does send behavior cues to everyone else. And in day-to-day life, for us, that video is insignificant. It's significant to them because of the context in which they live. We don't live in that context, but they are sending cues to us with their activity. And I think it's one of the horrible things about being a public servant, that you need to consider the effect of your actions on the public. And even though inside you really feeling like something's unfair and you just really want to just let it out, you just need to be conscious of your responsibilities. Along the lines of what AOC was saying, you need to set a certain bar. You need to take your job seriously. So for that reason, I don't like them sending a signal that this is completely unacceptable in any context, when I just don't think that's true. I can see why it's a no-no in their context, but yeah, I feel like this is just defining down what we get outraged about way past the level where it becomes faux outrage for most of us. I'm not saying they're faux outraged. I'm saying for most of us out in the real world where we don't live in their bubble of death threats and hatred. I suppose I would say that the answer to this, what is the answer? I don't think it's censuring Paul Gosar. Not that I really care, but I don't think that's the answer. I think that the answer is to address the culture that makes them so nervy. It's a dysfunctional culture. It's a horrible culture. It's a genuine problem. I don't like the way they downplay it and don't talk about it because they don't want to encourage people. I think they should be honest about it because it's completely dysfunctional and it would drive politicians away. Like Anthony Gonzalez, who's quitting the Republican, mainly because of how shit he's been treated by his supposed supporters. I think it's a real problem, and every single one of us would have a problem if we were in Washington. So I think they should at least acknowledge it and address it as much as the best they can. Address the culture, not these stupid things that are auxiliary to the culture that you try and make representatives of this culture. That's my view. And enough about that. A couple of quick things. Nancy Mace introduced a bill, a marijuana legalization bill called the States Reform Act. And Nancy Mace is I think it's Pennsylvania, House Republican. When she first entered the chamber 2 years ago, she actually campaigned as a bit of a post-Trump type in 2020. Like there was a sense that Trump was about to be finished, and she was like having none of his stuff. She wasn't pushing the election thing, the stolen election thing. When January 6th happened, she wasn't a fan of that. But then when it looked like the MAGA heads were sort of taking over the Republican Party again, she backslid and she realized that it's not post-Trump, not even close. And then so she started to say things a lot more like she needs to do to ingratiate herself to those supporters. She's kind of a bit betwixt and between as far as the Republican Party goes, on which side of the Republican Party civil war she's on. Anyway, she introduced a marijuana legalization bill. Schumer's already got one of them in the Senate. He's got like a do everything legalization kind of bill. This one's, Nancy Mace is a bit more stripped back. Both bills remove cannabis from the schedule of controlled substances, which is very important. Because the schedule of controlled substances stops research being done and it forces all kinds of regulations on marijuana that you would associate with a much harder drug. Both bills would establish a nationwide minimum purchase age of 21. Both bills would require automatic expungement of federal criminal records related to non-violent marijuana offences, which would be great. A whole bunch of people who have criminal records because of non-violent marijuana offences, really minor ones. Both would bar the Small Business Administration from discriminating against state licensed cannabis businesses, because right now, even in California, the federal government it's legally obliged to mess with your business because it's still illegal federally for you to have this perfectly legal statewide business. So so that's a really good thing to do, to just end that and say, if you're in a state where marijuana is legal, you can have banking, you can just act like a normal business. You don't need to worry about federal regulators messing with you. So they both do that. They both allow Veterans Health Administration doctors to recommend medical marijuana, which would be nice. They both would leave states free to ban marijuana if they want to, the state, but they would bar interference with shipments between jurisdictions where cannabis is legal. So if, say, Oklahoma wants to keep marijuana illegal, that's fine, but they can't mess with a shipment of marijuana from one state where it's legal to another state where it's legal through Oklahoma. Say if there's a truck that goes through Oklahoma or something like that. That's good as well. There's small differences like taxes. Schumer's taxing, I think, 20% or 25%. Nancy Mace is taxing 3% of marijuana, an excise tax. And then Schumer's using that 20 to 25% to then invest in a whole bunch of social justice, marijuana, justice, whatever, and try and create equity in drug-related areas. That's fine. I'm not saying that's bad. That's fine. But I don't think it's necessary to do that, to legalize marijuana. Like at the moment, you have this ridiculous situation where states can legalize marijuana, but then the feds can start messing with them anyway. In fact, they're obliged to mess with them. We need to stop that right now, in my view. So I think they should pass Nancy Mace's bill as soon as possible. If not before the next election, then after the next election. This is something that can be, she's already got heaps of, at least a number of Republican co-sponsors. I think this is something that can get Republican support. At least 10 senators, I think this can get. Do it. This is one of the few areas where you can get bipartisanship. Do it. This is good. This is good legislation, in my view. Haven't heard anything about it. No one cares. We'll try inflation or whatever, or anime videos. I don't know what else I can say. Pass it. This is not half a loaf. This is 90% of a loaf. Just get that damn loaf into Congress right now. The other thing is, I just want to flag that the Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, she had a speech the other day where essentially she put white-collar criminals on notice. We've been talking every now and then since the GFC about why don't they ever arrest these white-collar criminals, these dodgy guys? Why do they just get slaps on the wrist, tiny fines? Like, no one cares about this. Why? Well, Lisa Monaco is making very clear. She didn't have to make this speech. She's making very clear they're going after white-collar criminals. And it's with Attorney General Garland's blessing. So if she means that, and I think she does, otherwise, why would she make this speech? It's not like it was getting any attention. No one cared about it. Like, I just happened to see the speech and thought, wow, this is a great speech. If they're serious about this, that's something they can do in the 2023 and 2024 when they can do nothing else because Republicans will hold Congress. That's something that they can keep on doing right to the end of the election. It might be very popular too, hauling some white-collar criminals into court. And it's just a good thing to do. Like, it's just the right thing to do. So fingers crossed on that one. We'll see what happens. Now, my final thought is I was going to play you a viral clip on Planet America. I didn't play America, but we couldn't in the end because we ran out of airtime. But it's a very funny clip. I want to play it to you and I want to talk to you about it because, well, I've got a lot of thoughts about this. You might have seen it. It's from Laura Ingraham's show. Enjoy.
To the politics and all those woke storylines in so many shows today. You know, I was watching an episode of You where measles came up.
Wait. When did I mention measles?
I don't know. It was on You.
Wait, what was on me? What are you talking about? Right? Is Raymond even hearing what I'm saying? I never had the measles.
Was on You.
We never did a measles and vaccine episode. Is this a joke?
I know.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
It was on You. It was on You.
I've never had measles. What are you talking about? This is stupid.
It was an episode of a show, Laura.
What's it called?
You.
What is he talking about?
It's called You.
I've never done a show on measles. I just completely give up. We got to get out of
It's a show
I give up.
called You on Netflix.
There's a show called Laura Ingraham on Netflix. What are you talking
Never mind.
about?
I'm moving on to Adele. I can't explain this to
What's
you.
he
The
talking
pop
about?
singer had an open.
That clip was very funny. When I first saw it, I loved it. It's like a classic Who's on First comedy routine, except it's real, apparently. But then I saw this clip.
We'll take a selfie. Here, you take that one. It's open.
It hurts
and
my
I'll
hand.
take a quick selfie. You ready?
All right, ready?
Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
Smile. Do we have it? Wait,
Yeah,
the angle.
Go to the edge.
Wait, the angle.
Go to the edge. The ACLU used to care about the rights of accused, but with Kavanaugh, well, they spent $1 million comparing.
And that was also funny, but it made me ask some questions. What are the chances that the same two hosts would be involved in two such weird moments? How much does Ingraham talk to this guy? That's the first thing. I could just go, oh, that's a real coincidence that they're both involved in these wild, unlikely, viral events. Laura Ingraham and this apparent bit guy. So then I started to consider whether these might be set up for some reason. On one hand, let's take that second clip. That selfie behavior was extremely weird. I mean, why would he keep changing the angle so that he was moving the camera away from Laura Ingraham? You see how he says, oh, I'm changing the angle, change the angle. Oh, by the way, sorry, for those listening to this, sorry, you really should watch the clip that I just showed. It showed this entertainment guy saying, let's take selfies for some reason, and then graduate and craning at a weird angle with Laura Ingraham so he could see, so he could take a selfie of both of them, but then change the angle so it was actually moving away from Laura Ingraham, the camera, and then he fell off his chair. That's what that was. But wouldn't you change the angle so it's more towards her, and your arm would be across you a little bit more, so you would be in a better position rather than a worse position? He was changing the angle of the camera in a completely unrealistic way. That's something I noticed when I looked a bit more carefully. Why was he so frenetic in his insistence on the selfie? When you're making live TV, you don't focus on things that don't matter. So if you're taking a selfie, go, oh, let's take a selfie. Oh, okay, great. Even if you think to yourself, well, that selfie's shit, you just think to yourself, well, we're making live TV, so I'm not going to make a big deal out of this. He made a big deal out of it, which is unusual and weird. Why would Ingraham not acknowledge his fall without even an eyebrow raise? For those who are listening to this and not watching it, she literally carried on without any acknowledgement, either verbally or even physically whatsoever. She just turned her head to the other camera and just started talking. Not even an eyebrow raise. If I was doing that, I would definitely raise my eyebrow. It just, to plow on like that is unnatural. Trust me, I make TV. I know what it feels like when you're doing that. It's unnatural. Just plow on without any recognition whatsoever of the weird thing that just happened. So like for her to not even acknowledge the fall at all was either deliberate comedy or sociopathic behavior, in my view. But on the other hand, that's on one hand, so it's set up. On the other hand, his fall was incredible. Like, I did stunts on the Chaser all the time. It is really hard to fall in a realistic way without looking like you're making yourself fall. You can't help but hold yourself just slightly differently when you're trying to fall. It's just impossible to let yourself go. It's just really, really hard. He does it just like a stuntman. It's a perfect fall that he does there. Like, it looks 100% realistic. So if he's done that as a staged pratfall, he's a brilliant physical actor. So there is that. I don't know. It's hard to know. It's hard to balance those two things for me. So anyway, so now I'm thinking maybe they're setups, maybe they're not. I'm not sure. So now I watched the original clip again. Let's watch it again.
To the politics and all those woke storylines in so many shows today. You know, I was watching an episode of You where measles came up.
Wait. When did I mention measles?
I don't know. It was on You.
What was on me? What are you talking about? Right? Is Raymond even hearing what I'm saying? I never had the measles.
Was on You.
We never did a measles and vaccine episode. Is this a joke?
I know.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
It was on You. It was on You.
Raymond, I've never had measles. What are you talking about? This is stupid.
It was an episode of a show, Laura.
What's it called?
You.
What is he talking about?
It's called You.
I've never done a show on measles. I just completely give up. We got to get out of
it. It's a show
I give up.
called You on Netflix.
There's a show called Laura Ingraham on Netflix. What are you talking
Never mind.
about?
I'm moving on to Adele. I can't explain this to you.
The
pop singer had an open.
Firstly, still great acting from both of them. The way they, if it's not true, if it's a setup, great acting from both of them, especially the guy. very good acting. Laura Ingraham was also, like, she's blushing and like it's a great performance. But so I should say I am impressed with their abilities if it's staged. But it's odd that he never said early on, no, Laura, you misunderstand me. It's not your show I'm talking about. It's another show on Netflix. Like, it took him a long time. It took him, what, 4 iterations before he explained it properly? He just kept on repeating this not very good explanation. That's the kind of thing you would do if you were performing a written comedy routine rather than real life. Once again, bear in mind, it's live TV. People don't fuck around. They are very explicit when there's a misunderstanding going on. So that makes me slightly suspicious. Then I noticed the things that Laura Ingraham was saying while she was acting well. Her actual dialogue kind of sounded like a bad improviser. Like, she kept on saying, "What are you saying?" So what are you talking about? What are you talking about? She kept on saying. People don't repeat "What are you talking about" over and over again like she did, and saying something like, "Is he joking?" Like it's not something. It seemed unnatural to me. In particular, the thing that I thought really seemed unnatural was Laura Ingraham saying, when he said, it's a show called You on Netflix, and Laura said, "There's a show called Laura Ingraham on Netflix." That's not a natural reaction. It's a show called You on Netflix. There's a show called Laura Ingraham on Netflix. That sounds like scripted dialogue. That sounds like comedy dialogue. That's not a natural reaction, in my view. Also, don't forget there'll be someone in her ear. And the odds of both her and the person in her ear both being confused, very, very slim. And that person in her ear would say, "No, Laura, he's talking about a show on Netflix." It'll be really easy to disabuse her of a confusion. The person who's talking in her ear, who would always be talking in her ear. She'd be used to that person talking in her ear. So that also makes it less likely. So now, after that, I'm starting to think that these are setups, both of them. The question is, why? Is Ingraham's weird sense of humor that weird? she wants to just create random, strange moments that aren't really comedy, but if they were real, they'd be awesome. But it's just a weird thing to put on your news show. Like, normally with news shows, you don't have time to cram in everything. You don't waste a minute doing random setup routines that, if you don't quite pull it off, will look awful as well. Is it just to create viral content? Maybe. I don't know. But whether these are setups or not, in both cases, there's something really weird going on here with these moments. Either Laura is an excellent actor and has a very strange sense of humor, or she's a sociopath. Like, if she's serious during both those clips, she's acting in very strange ways and she does not behave like a human being at all. So anyway, so that's my take. I think they're set up. But I'm not 100% sure. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely interested if anyone's seen any other evidence on either side that I hadn't thought about to suggest they're either real or not real. I do think they're set up. Anyway, one thing before we leave, something that happened in the last few hours while I was between when we recorded the first part of this podcast and the last was the Tim Payne news. I want to tell you a very quick story. I'm not going to use any names because it'd be highly defamatory and I don't want to break up a marriage. But back in 2004, I think it was, I heard from a friend of a friend that there was a particular cricket player who was a real nuisance at the pubs and clubs and hassled girls relentlessly and was giving his number around to everyone, trying to get them to hook up with him, this particular person. And we weren't making a TV show at the time. We were just not doing much. And I just thought, this sounds like fun. I might have a bit of fun with this. So I asked the girl for his number. And then I got a burner phone and I started texting him as a 14-year-old girl who had met him at the pub the other night, and he gave her his number and just wanted to carry on with it. And I figured this guy clearly gives his number out to a lot of people, so he'll probably buy this. And he did. And as time went on, I made this girl, I created more and more red flashing lights for this girl, and to see if this cricketer would keep on going on with it. And first of all, I didn't say she was 14 at the beginning. I just said, I met you at the club. And then I dropped after a few texts. Oh, by the way, I'm 14. I just look older. That's how I get into the pub. And then I dropped that she was a runaway. And then I dropped that, it just went on and on and on. It became very, very, shall we say, unsalubrious. And at that point in time, I just started going out with my now wife. And we actually, it was the best time we ever had in our relationship. We spent huddling next to each other in bed, texting this particular cricketer over and over and over again, flirting with him. And all he wanted to do was he wanted to call, he wanted to meet up, and we're going, no, we don't want to call or meet up. We just want to text, focus out. My boyfriend's nearby. I've got an old-fashioned phone. I can only text. I've run out of data. So I've run out of, this is a prepaid phone and I don't have any phone call time left. Just come up with any excuse we possibly could to not talk to him, just to keep on texting. So number one, so obviously wouldn't give it away. But secondly, because I was thinking, I think I'm going to print all this in the Chaser newspaper. I think that's where this is going. And we went on for weeks and weeks, and it was getting very sordid. And I was doing a lot of really lame cricket puns, and he loved them. He just came back with a few of his own about his stumps and all the rest of it. Anyway, after a while, we thought, okay, we've pushed this as far as it can go. He has shown that he has zero standards now, and if I push this any further, it would be extremely illegal. So let's just end this. So I was going to agree to meet him in a pub and then have the cameras there, of course. And then I would show up in a dress going, yoo-hoo! And that would be there'll be something for a TV show we would make eventually. The problem was, before I got the invite out, you got to realize this burner phone was just hanging in the Chaser office a lot of the time. And everyone who came into the Chaser office was just obsessed with this phone, just going through the messages, loving it. Someone nicked the phone. Or they lost the phone. I don't know. I probably lost it. It was a real shithole, our office. But anyway, just at the critical moment, we lost the phone. We lost all the texts. We lost this guy's number. And that was the end of that, which was very depressing. Although having said that, in hindsight, and when I say hindsight, I don't mean now. I mean, a month later hindsight, I started to get second thoughts because I thought to myself, it turned out that this person was in a relationship, which continues to this day. It narrows it down a bit. There aren't too many cricketers who are in long-term relationships. But anyway, this cricketer was in a relationship, and I thought, well, I know they're scum, but do I want to be the one who's broken up a relationship for laughs? Oh, feels a bit ugly. Yeah. Anyway, in the end, I didn't have to make that decision because the gods made the decision for me. Why am I telling you? It's number one, because it's kind of cool. But number two, it's a great story. Number two, why do these cricketers ever learn? Why, was it 17 years later, are they still doing this shit? Why are they sending texts? They are famous people. I would never send a dick pic to anyone, let alone someone who's not my wife. I would never do that because you just never know. Even if you trust the person you send it to, you never know if someone, their friends, is going to get the phone and find it and then send it out to someone else or whatever. And and especially if you're screwing around with them and treating them like shit, why would you put them in a position where they can destroy your career, where they can make money out of destroying your career? It's just insane. How stupid are these people? These guys are so much more famous than I am. What are they doing? I don't get it. I know they're athletes, but really, God, how dumb do you have to be? I do not understand why they never, ever, ever learn. We are about 20 years past them learning that this is a bad idea. Tim Paine seems like a smart guy to me. Well, at least not a dumb guy. And that tells me he's actually, appearances deceive. He must be a dumb guy to be carrying on like that. I mean, let's let aside the morality. I mean, obviously, it's immoral and all the rest of it, but just, I cannot understand the way these people think. I can't get into their heads why they're turned on by that. I can't get into their heads why they think it's a good idea. I can't get into their heads why they think this might not blow up in their face when they are the captain of the Australian cricket team. Anyway, enough of all that. I will see you guys a little bit later. Obviously, possibly late in the week. We might have Bill Wyman guesting in the middle of the week. Fingers crossed on that one. Can't guarantee it though. So I'll see you in the middle of the week. I'll see you next week as we proceed towards Wokesgiving. Thanks so much, folks. I'll see you next week. Bye.